Oliver Burkeman, welcome to the podcast. I cannot believe that I'm talking to you. Your voice is very familiar to me from all the audiobooks and interviews that I listen to, but it is an absolute joy to see you down the other end of the Zoom call. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad we could make this work out despite all the time zone
Yeah,
ridiculousness.
quite possibly the most important question for our conversation this afternoon. What's your coffee order?
What's my coffee order?
Yeah.
You know, we live in the middle of nowhere now in the North York Moors, and I drink a huge amount of coffee, but I just make it myself in a
Lovely.
French press, and
Fantastic.
uh, find myself very rarely in coffee shops at the moment.
Sometimes it's the simple French press that does the best. We
But I
are
can, I will happily partake of a flat white when I'm in a position to do so. Yeah.
fantastic. It's lovely to hear a British accent. My entire family, apart from my dad, live over in Bath and
Oh yeah.
Nottingham, Derby, and it's lovely. You guys are beginning to enjoy some warmer weather, which is lovely.
Yeah, slowly but surely. I have to say today has not uh excelled itself, but we're
Yeah.
getting there. Yeah.
Fantastic. And is there a book, Oliver, that's caused you to stop and reconsider a few things in your life or
A
books?
book. I mean, on some level, I think this happens all the time. Um, I'll mention a couple of them. I mean, a book I've mentioned all over the place, but it's because it made such a big impact on me, is a book called Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life by
Yeah,
James Hollis,
yeah,
uh, who I've since had the very great fortune to get to meet and know a little bit. Um, it's sort of written from a Jungian perspective, although I'm not sure that really matters. Like I advise people to read it anyway. Also, I don't think it matters whether you think you're in the second half of life, which is a rather
yes,
alarming concept. Uh,
yes,
Sort of requires you to sign up to the idea
yeah,
that you're on a glide path to death. But
yeah, that's right.
the concept of midlife in especially in Jungian psychology, the time when people start reevaluating things and wondering whether it's time to sort of live in a different way than the one that has served them up till now, that can definitely happen in your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, your
Mm,
70s. Maybe I don't know about your 20s, but it's a broad term. It's not about being you know, you
yeah,
don't necessarily need to be old to
yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah. And
And another book that sorry.
sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go on.
I've just finished reading David Brooks's The Second Mountain.
Ah,
Um,
right,
it
yes. Yeah.
seems to be have a similar vein, but it's sorry for the interruption. You were saying?
Um, no, I was just gonna that's a very much in that same
Yeah,
vein. The Second Mountain. No, I was going to mention another book called Being Time, which is a
yeah,
commentary on an old Zen text by Zen founder Dogen by an American Zen teacher called Shinshu Roberts. Anyway, people who are not into the sort of details of Zen might not
mm,
be
mm,
so interested in where it comes from, but the writing really sort of brought home to me this idea, and I came across this after publishing 4,000 Weeks, my book about finitude of time. Uh, this idea comes across very powerfully from Dogen through Shinshu Roberts's writing that in some sense like we are time,
yeah,
that it doesn't really make sense necessarily to think of time as something that we use, but as something that we are. And I had explored this idea in my own book, partly through the work of uh, Martin Heidegger,
yes,
the German philosopher, which is sort of unfortunate on two fronts because he was really, really sort of impenetrably difficult to understand and also a Nazi. So it's like,
yeah,
what, how many counts against you as a philosopher do you need? And Dogen, in modern translation anyway, manages to sort of express these same ideas, this
mm,
extremely mysterious but I think liberating idea about being time, without being either impenetrable or a Nazi.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and so I was really struck to sort of discover this same notion like occurring a totally different historical period, a totally different cultural
Wow.
tradition. And I think it's a really interesting one. Yeah.
That's really interesting, Oliver. And it seems as if throughout various points of history, we're all trying to ask these same questions, aren't we? Or sorry, we're all trying to
Yeah.
find answers to these questions, which are essentially part of the human condition. And Oliver, if you could have a dinner party with anybody, obviously your family doesn't count in the head count. I don't want to get you in any kind of strife here, but who would you love to sit down with and share a meal and have a conversation?
Is this living or dead or just living people?
Could be both. Yeah.
Can I include like Seneca the Stoic, or should I be talking about, modern day thought leaders? I
No,
guess.
not at all. It's your it's I'm interviewing you, so whatever you think is whatever you think.
um, I've sort of come across questions like this before, and it's always interesting to me because on the one hand, you just want to sort of select the thinkers and the writers who have made the most difference to you, but on the other hand, you start thinking about like who'd be really good at a dinner party
That's right.
specifically. I
Yeah.
think uh I think sort of going back through history, I assume that like Montaigne would be good at a dinner party, and probably like Arthur Schopenhauer wouldn't, because he'd be really gloomy and
Would be good
wild-eyed and
company. Yes.
put everybody off a bit. Um, uh, and I'm just going to honestly respond in a sort of way that basically evades the question, which is like, I have been asked in the past in other contexts, like, who are the sort of 3 or 4 people who
Yeah.
made the most? And to some extent, your book's question is a bit like that too. And I'm always just like, there's 500 of these people, right? And
Mhm.
it's not like any one of them is my
Yeah.
guru. And it's not like I'm that familiar with all of their work either. I've got this very, very sort of magpie approach to
Mhm.
everything. And in the book, some people have commented, usually favorably, not always, that I'm capable of sort of citing Marcus Aurelius and
Yes.
Danielle Steele on the same page, or uh,
Yeah.
who am I thinking of? I mean, yeah, someone like Kierkegaard and someone like Rod Stewart, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I really just, if I find something that resonates with me, I just
Mhm.
take all of
I,
it. And so
I
I
love
find
that.
it
Yeah.
genuinely quite tricky to be like, well, which are the 3 or 4
Mm.
who matter the most?
And I really felt that when I was reading your book, is it does seem to be there's such a plethora of influences you draw on. I mean, from people that are more contemporary to people that are sort of ancient Stoics, and it's lovely, like I said, to see these sort of common threads with human nature, that people are still asking these questions and
Yeah,
we're still trying
yeah,
to find out meaning. And I think that's a wonderful answer. So maybe less of a dinner table and more of a banquet table full of 300 or 400 people through history.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
uh, Oliver, I was just wondering, why are we so obsessed with productivity? Because your book, 4,000 Weeks, as I mentioned before we hit record, it was one of those books that I have read countless times again, and it caused me to stop in my tracks and go, oh my gosh, that's me. So where does this obsession with trying to get more things done come from? And how has maybe your relationship with productivity shifted over the years? I'm aware that's a very long-winded question, but over to you.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'll give you a long-winded answer. I think, if I'm really honest, I think I tend to be a bit evasive on the grand causal questions about these
Mm,
things, because I think it's very difficult to say. I think you can definitely look at a whole lot of different forces, social, economic, psychological, and see them pointing in the same direction. So, um, you know, going back a long way, the process of industrialization leads to this way of thinking that causes us to value time as a resource, wanting to get the most value out of any given hour. I think that certain religious traditions, especially Protestant Christianity, have a real focus on the idea that your worth and maybe your worthiness for heaven is proved by
mm,
how much you create and produce. And then of course there's just like, well, it's capitalism that that has this interest in keeping us producing and in sort of extracting as much value out of each of us as possible. I think a lot of people, myself included, have a kind of psychological bearing that
Yeah.
puts a lot of self-worth, makes a lot of self-worth be as at stake when it comes to our productivity. There is this wonderful concept that so many people resonate with of the insecure overachiever, which
Yeah.
comes from the psychological literature, right? This idea that people who are very driven and do all sorts of cool stuff and get good grades at school and like everything looks like they're doing the right thing, and they are in a way, but they're doing it because they think they won't be okay as people
Yeah.
if they don't do all those things. So I think it just all comes together. And I do want to put a little final caveat there and say there is a good reason to be maybe not obsessed, but invested in productivity, which is that, making things and creating things and bringing things into being is a huge part of how we as humans experience meaningful lives. So it's not that I'm not someone, and this is one of the things I sort of struggle with, but I think eventually managed to get across in the book. I'm not someone who thinks that the ideal here would just be to just chill out and just like lie in a hammock all day long and do nothing. Like that's not me. That's not my personality. I want to do things. I'm quite ambitious, and in a way, I'm trying to rescue ambition and productivity. In a sane way, I suppose, rather than just throw the whole thing out.
I absolutely found that. I wasn't when I read the book, I wasn't just assuming that you were sitting at home doing nothing. It sort of seemed as if it was less but more meaningful. So actually being a little bit more conscious about what we are applying ourselves to, which I think is really lovely. And in the beginning of your book, you have a dedication to Heather and Rowan. So tell me about why you dedicated the book to Heather and Rowan.
I've never been asked that question before, although you can work out if you then go to the acknowledgements that
Yes,
Heather is
absolutely.
my partner and Rowan is my son. And dedicating books is an interesting, well, to me anyway, an interesting topic because I've only really, well, I've just finished a third, and that one actually doesn't have a dedication, but the two sort of main books I wrote before that were dedicated. First one to my parents and this one to Heather and Rowan. And there's a debate or difference you'll notice if you study dedications about whether it says for or to. And I never like for, especially with the kind of book I write, because it really implies like or it risks implying here's a bunch of wisdom that you really need. And it's like it's for you because like I know this stuff and you need to get this into your head. That is absolutely not my experience either of my partner. I say wife quite often. We're not technically married, but in all but technical in all but the technical sense. Because like she is such an outlier. She is one of the people least troubled by digital distraction, least like most capable of just deciding to focus on some things and do it and then stop when she's finished that I know. So she certainly doesn't need a lot of that kind of advice. And then of course, Rowan, our son, born after this book was an idea, but by the time the book actually came out, he was past toddlerhood because books take a long time and children get in the way of your book writing. But children sort of universally, I think, especially small children, don't need this kind of advice. And that's a very interesting. I think there's something interesting about that. Why is it that kids generally don't need help?
Yeah.
Be present in the moment and
Fantastic.
doing things that bring them pleasure with their time. But anyway, so the book is dedicated to them, more to say like, there's this lovely idea in Buddhism of dedicating merit, which says basically like if there's anything worthwhile in this book, like I sort of send the value to you, which is not the same thing as saying like here's a bunch of wisdom that you need to understand.
Yeah. And Oliver, I'm a parent of two very strong-minded girls. Very proud to be very, very, very proud to be a girl dad. And being a parent has it actually took us a long time to have kids, and I didn't think we would be able to, which of course brings a whole new appreciation and gratitude for having young children. Um, but becoming a dad has radically changed me in a way that I thought I couldn't quite comprehend. And as someone who, in your book, you mentioned that you used to be quite obsessed with productivity and someone that has tried out all of the gimmicks and approaches and all of that kind of stuff. And how has becoming a dad changed you, and how has it given you a kind of a new perspective on what's important in life?
You know, it's really odd what happened in this respect. I mean, and good, but like I found it very strange because, like I say, I had the idea for 4,000 Weeks and the proposal and sold the idea to publish it before our son came along. I don't think I was ever someone who, I think I could quite easily have ended up being someone who didn't have kids. I can't imagine that now, and
It's crazy, yeah.
with hindsight, it would have been awful for me to go that path. But like quite easily, I wasn't sort of the other kind of person for whom it either is a certain or they you
Yes.
know they want it to be certain. It doesn't always. Obviously, people have encounter obstacles. Um, but there's a philosopher called L.A. Paul who has this concept she calls transformative experience,
Yeah.
where certain things, including parenthood above all, I would say, change you so much that you can't even know in advance whether they're going to change you into the kind of person who um, is happy to have taken that decision or not. So,
Yes.
you know, fortunately, becoming a parent turned me into the kind of person who really loves being a parent. But I guess it could have gone the other way
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
principle, right? You could have been someone who really wanted to become a parent, and then you became a parent, and it changed you into someone who wished you'd never become a parent. Anyway, what I was trying to say was that I had the idea for the book, and the book sort of points towards a saner, more present, less productivity focused and future obsessed attitude towards time. And I found this with a lot of writing I do. Like I get this intellectual idea, and it's pretty clear, but it totally doesn't match up with my life. Right? I'm actually coming up with it really as advice to myself. It's
Yeah.
something that I
Yeah.
I need to learn, and then to actually turn it into a book or to pursue the idea much further in any form, you have to kind of live your way into that some more.
Mm.
And the totally crazy thing is that, like, I don't know how I could ever have lived my way into this without the lessons that becoming a father has
Yeah.
has given me. And
Yeah.
yet the idea came before that was so it feels like fated in some way.
Mm.
And then the answer in terms of the specifics then obviously is that, you know, to express it in terms that are much more negative than I really mean it, but it's
Yes.
how it comes to mind. First of all, it's like, if you want reminding that you're not in full control of your schedule, if you want reminding that you don't know what the future holds and you can't ever quite get a fix on anything, and that you constantly have to make trade-offs and decide to not do things that would have been useful things to do because there's something more important to do, like all of this is just so dramatized by becoming a parent. You
Oh,
immediately lose
everything.
like at least a third of your discretionary time, and for large swathes of it, I feel like it's much more than a third.
Yeah.
You sort of have to respond to things that life needs you to do in that moment, rather
Yeah.
than coming
Yeah.
up with a plan and implementing it. You
Yes.
can't all sorts of the parts of the experience you can't make more efficient, and if you somehow managed it, you would ruin them.
Mm.
Um, it's just every single aspect of it is
Yeah.
is like a reminder that kind of um, very productivity focused, very efficiency focused, very willpower focused attitude towards time is like is incredibly limited. And my sense is not that, you know,
Yeah.
I sometimes, I don't think it's that that parenthood necessarily gives you experiences that you can't possibly have without becoming a parent. I think it's that they really makes it unignorable, you know, things that I already sort of thought or sort of believed, but now it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, that's what that really means.
Yeah.
And just the idea of like a commitment that you can't back out of, even if you wanted to, which, by the way, I don't want to back out of commitment to parenting, but like, it's just
I know
like,
exactly what you mean.
you're fully in the world, whether you like it or not. That David Brooks writes somewhere about receiving an email from a friend when his first child was born that said, "Welcome to the world of unavoidable reality," or something like that. And it's just like, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And it's great, but it's daunting.
There's so much in that, Oliver. And I'm someone who I love to plan. I love a to-do list. I love to get stuff done. And I think that that illustration that you shared before about an insecure overachiever hits me quite hard because I really take a lot of value in ticking things off the list. And one of the things which your book speaks so eloquently to is actually embracing that uncertainty and realizing that control, or this sense of this sort of perception of being able to hold it all together is really quite an illusion, isn't it? And I was wondering if you'd mind just speaking to that, about how we can better embrace that uncertainty, because we were never in control, really, were we at all?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I mean, you control and the desire for control manifests in a lot of different forms, but one of those, I think, it's when you talk about crossing items off the list, is the idea of like getting on top of everything, getting
Yeah,
through everything, being in command of all the things that there
absolutely.
are to do, either having done them all or at least doing them at a rate that is the same as the rate that they come in, right? So that
Yes.
you're just in calm, sane control. And I totally, by the way, even to this day, know what you mean about enjoying ticking items off the list. But the question in the background is always like what do you think is the end game for this? Like, what do you think happens when you've ticked everything off the list? Like, why do you think it's going to be so great to get to the point where there's nothing left on that list? I think actually it might be terrible if we ever got to that situation. But so it's about shifting from that perspective that says like, one day I will get on top of everything, to just saying like, okay, being alive means there's always going to be plenty of things to do, and always going to be too much to do by some definition. And in that situation, you get to sort of drop back into the present and be like, okay, I'm no longer trying to get all these things out of the way. I'm just addressing myself to the thing that is here. And you know, it's very obvious with children, right? That you can't address. You can't really do much about being the parent of a teenager until your child is a teenager, right? You can't do much about any aspect of what it means to be a parent until you're at that moment. But that's true of everything. That's true of all of our lives. You know, the future only comes when it comes, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't ever do a bit of planning or a bit of prep or a bit of skill development. That's totally important. But it does mean that stance. It's hard to explain, but that sort of stance that wants to grab hold of the future from the present and just like get it in order now, is like, it goes very deep in me, but it's fundamentally absurd at the same time.
Yeah. That's so true. And do you find yourself, are you a recovering productivity geek? Just like I am. I feel myself falling into those patterns quite frequently. And sometimes I find the tension between being productive and relinquishing control. I find the pendulum swings all over the place sometimes. But can you relate to kind of falling? Do you ever fall back into those old habits of wanting to have achieved things at certain points in your life, or having to-do
Oh,
lists, or how do you
oh,
relate to that?
yeah, totally. I mean, sometimes if I'm like tired and stressed, I'll just be straight back into how I used to be for a little while.
Yeah.
But more common is a sort of sense that I've like you can sort of I feel like I've seen through it, and I've seen
Right.
through my own mind games in a way. So actually, arguably, the end point of this, for the ideal for sort of productivity enthusiasts, let's say,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, we don't talk about
Addicts. Yeah.
you don't talk about heroin enthusiasts, do you?
No,
The,
not at
the the end point really is not that I never download another productivity app, or that I never experiment with a new method of organizing the day, but almost the opposite, right? I can freely do that. I can do it because it's fun, and not because I think it's going to save me, or it's going to sort of, finally
Mm,
make me an adequate human being. It's just the more I see through the promise of that, the
yeah.
more I can say, like, yeah, actually, it is quite fun to sort of see if I can improve my workflow, see if I can get a bit more done in a less short amount of time, see if I can keep clarity on what all the different things on my plate. That's fine. Like, so long as it's not done in that sort of anxious, needy way that says like something
Yeah.
very bad is going to happen if I don't find the silver bullet for organizing my life.
Yeah. So how then, Oliver, how do we begin to start to set meaningful goals? Or how do we begin to structure our lives if we are embracing uncertainty, if we realize the just how fine, if we have a revelation of just how finite life is, how do we begin to move forward with all this information? Because I was speaking to a colleague today about your book, and she said I absolutely loved it, but I hated it at the same time because it caused me to change some things in my life. How on earth do we begin to move forward with all of this information that you're sharing with us?
It's a really good question. And I do think that ultimately the value of anything I'm saying here is a perspective shift, right?
Mm,
It is a
yeah,
way of thinking and relating differently to life. And then exactly how that manifests
yeah,
is very much sort of above my pay grade here, right? It's like it's going to be up to each person in their situation. Occasionally people say to me like, okay, right, this is what doesn't work, but like what does work? And I really have to say that's for you to figure out, because everyone is so different. And what I'm trying to do is sort of clear away a fog that we get into. And then what's there when the fog clears is is going to be very different for each
yeah,
of us. Now that said, I mean, I think there are a few things that seem quite universal when it comes to sort of a saner relationship, for example, with having so much that we want to do. Um, it does depend on your professional situation. Something
yeah,
interesting about a lot of teachers, for example, I don't know how much proportion your day-to-day life this is,
yeah,
but sure in your experience, are like have surprisingly like regulated days, right?
yeah,
So it's like there's actually not a lot of there's not a lot of wiggle room for deciding how you're going to organize the main blocks uh, of the day. And then there are people like me who have like almost too much autonomy in that
yeah,
respect.
yeah,
And so questions about whether my day should start at 7, 8, 9, or 10 are like
yeah,
constantly open in a way that they maybe aren't for people in other roles. But I do think that, the basic idea of limiting work in progress, right? Of doing a few things at a time, or one thing at a time rather than 100 things at a time. So having thinking of the work that you do to whatever extent is possible as having maybe 2 or 3 projects on your plate at a time, and learning to make all the other ones wait. and tolerate the anxiety of making them wait, and tolerate the
Mm.
downsides that come from
Yeah.
not being able to do those things, and just say,
Yeah.
right, it will be great to be able to do these, but actually these are the ones I'm doing at the moment. I find that very, very powerful. And the other thing there, I guess, is when it comes to sort of goals, for me, it's all about giving some direction to what I'm trying to do without regimenting my time so much that I just resent it and don't want to do it. So there has to be, and again, this might be harder for people in settings where there's like very often a collectively followed timetable and schedule, but like for me, there has to be some role for the question, what do I feel like doing? Like maybe it can't be everything.
Yeah.
And maybe I often do have to meet deadlines and, file taxes and all the rest of it. But I don't want to do what I think some people do, which is take the life of a freelancer or the life of someone with lots of autonomy and then like voluntarily re-imprison themselves in an incredibly strict schedule, which basically says, like, if it's 10:30 in the morning, you've got to be working on project X, even if you're suddenly feeling really enthusiastic about
Yeah.
project Y. And it's tricky because maybe you're never going to feel enthusiastic about project X, and feeling enthusiastic about project Y is just a way of procrastinating on project X. So there are nuances here, but it's been important for me, speaking also to that question about what's changed with me, it's like to be a bit more willing to ask, like, oh, what would I like to do now? And amazingly often you find that if you ask that question reliably, you end up doing a lot of the things that you sort of needed to do. Like I do actually feel like meeting my obligations and paying bills
Yeah.
and answering emails, because that's the kind of person I'd like to be.
Yeah. And I love one of the many revelations I got from your work is that it's actually a really freeing thing knowing that we have a limited time. And it's really quite empowering to realize that we have the equivalent of roughly 4,000 weeks that will be on this earth. And that is really precious. And it was really motivating to then go and do something meaningful with that time. I'm approaching my 40th birthday, so about 2,000 weeks in. And it definitely sort of caused me to pause and kind of reconsider a few things in my life because I see so many people that are my age and older
Mm-hmm.
that wake up at some point and go, "Oh my gosh, I don't know how I got here." And
Right.
yeah, and I think it was a really great realization that we actually do have a lot more um, autonomy than we may realize. And life is this precious, beautiful experience that we need to embrace. And I think I was kind of freaked out at the title at first, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, 4,000 weeks!" And I did the maths and realized you're absolutely right. But then there is so much power and wonder and beauty in your book because it's a reminder of just how precious life is. It's really
And I
beautiful.
hope, yeah, thank you. And I hope, just to speak to that like it may be, like, I think the title is a bit stress inducing when people work out what it is. And maybe
Yeah,
that was a commercially wise decision,
I
right?
think
But
it was.
maybe it was
Yeah.
unwise because maybe people are like terrified and run away and don't buy the book. But I do want to split apart, I think, that notions of preciousness, which you're absolutely right about, from a certain kind of anxiety that says, like, oh my gosh, time is so precious. I've got to like cram every moment with something extraordinary. I've got to be
Hmm.
constantly self-conscious about whether I'm using it well enough. And really what I want to say is, like, we are so finite and life is so short and our control over it is so limited that actually it goes beyond being a source of stress and becomes a cause for
Hmm.
relaxing, because it's like
Yeah.
you're not getting around to the majority of the things that you might have wished to do. You're not going to find the time to do all the things that feel like they are important obligations or duties, right? It's all that's just off the table to begin with.
Yeah.
And for me, that's incredibly empowering, right? Because
Yeah.
that's when you get to say, great, well, then what are some things that would be good to do? What are the 3 or 4 things I can do?
Love that.
What are the priorities that I can address myself to really energetically this year now that I'm no longer thinking I'm going to get to 200 of them.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And there's this sort of beautiful contrast there as well, because while we do not have control over our lives, we also do. We are also empowered to make decisions to apply ourselves to those really meaningful tasks. And I think there's this beautiful contrast in the book where it is both confronting and terrifying, but also incredibly liberating and incredibly beautiful. And I know that the first time I read this book, I hugged my kids that little bit tighter. And I think they thought something was wrong with me. But I loved that notion. And on that thought, I love the notion when you talk about the last time. And for those people that haven't read the book, would you mind unpacking that, the whole concept of everything has a last time? It sounds so simple, but it's so powerful.
Yeah, well, this comes, as I say in the book, this particular way of thinking about it from Sam Harris, the
Yeah.
podcaster
Amazing,
and author and
amazing person. Yeah.
meditation teacher
Yeah.
and all the rest of it. And he makes this point that, our lives are full of things that we are doing for the last time that we'll do them. And almost all of the time when that happens, you won't know that it's the last time. And the sort of
Yeah.
example that he gives that is just terrifying for all parents of smallish children is that there'll be like a last time you pick up your kid.
It's too much.
physically
Yeah.
pick up your
Yeah.
child. And it's like, my son is 7. He's pretty heavy to pick up, but I still don't really believe that that time is ever coming. And yet I'm obliged to say that, when I meet up with my dad, who's in his 70s, as I do pretty often, he never picks me up. And it would be pretty weird if he did. So, clearly there is going to be a last time that this happens.
Mm.
And you then can sort of think that of all sorts of other things. The last time you meet up with a certain friend, the last time you visit a certain place that is very dear to your heart. And then Sam Harris sort of twists the knife one more rotation, I suppose.
He does that.
Says,
Yeah.
that actually this is true of every moment. I mean, in some sense, the moment that you're experiencing now is the last time you'll experience that moment. It's in the nature of being finite that, like, that is all that we're doing. We're just waving goodbye to moment after moment after moment. Some of them might be happy to wave goodbye to if they're full of suffering, but that's a really it's a really interesting perspective. In the book that I've just been putting together now, I've mentioned that this whole same idea comes up in the idea of the sort of ethos of the Japanese tea ceremony. Which is this idea of ritual where you have to be very sort of attentive to how you're doing it and very exquisitely sort of attentive to the moment, because it can only ever exist in that moment. And once it's gone, you're never having that ceremony again. You might have a similar ceremony. You might have it with the same people. You might have it the same people hundreds of times, but it would never be that one.
Yeah. It's beautiful.
And there's
And
something
terrifying.
very profound about that. Also terrifying. Yes, absolutely.
Another thing I've started doing after reading your book is every time my kids ask me to play with them, I do that. And my kids are quite little, so 4 and 6. And I mean, as many people do, it's very easy to work at home. It's something I'm trying to get a lot better at. And previously, when my kids or my daughter has asked me to play with her, I would say, "Oh, I will in a minute," or "I will," and then evidently she will go off and do something else, and that moment is gone. And so what I do now is every time she says, "Daddy, can I play with you?" or can we read a book? Can we do this?" I say, "Yes, absolutely," because I know that it will be. We are one step closer to that last time, because I reckon in 10 years' time, she probably will think, "Oh, I don't know anything," and won't want to hang out with me. So it is. I think parenting from that angle has really caused me to slow down and appreciate what is important. And that's why I have gifted this book to so many of my friends and told them that they have to read it, because there's so many little moments in it that I think cause us to just slow down realize that we're not in as much control as we think we are, and also to really appreciate the beauty and the wonder of life. Oliver, I would love to hear your thoughts on technology because it's really difficult to be present when you're looking at your phone, when you're checking emails, when you're doing all these kind of things. So, do you have any advice on how we can sort of change our relationship with how we interact with technology? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's a constant struggle.
It's
It's a
so
constant,
hard. Yeah.
and I'm going through this at the moment with our son as well, because it's very difficult with as a parent, because on some level you don't want your children to be glued to screens all the time, but on another level, there's a lot of really creative stuff that you can do with an iPad
Yeah.
these days,
Yeah.
and it's like it's not mindless consumption of pablum. It's like making things, and I think that's a good thing. And I almost feel like, for myself as well as for my son, that there's something to be said for a more relaxed attitude, right? There's always a risk. I tend to side with the people who are sort of saying, like, smartphones have made the current generation of 20 somethings, terribly anxious and depressed, and it's bad, and we should be limiting it. I think that's right. But then I also think, like, there's something that's like it makes me a little bit less of a good parent and a little bit less of a happier person, regardless of parenthood. Whenever I'm really fretting about anything, even if that thing I'm fretting about is not going too far with technology. So it's a really difficult thing, because you don't want to just give into it, but you also don't want to be spending your whole life in a sort of pinched and cramped way, trying to not give into it and be sort of obsessed with that. So I don't have any sort of magic bullet. I think that a lot of the sort of situational environmental solutions people propose, like getting into the habit of plugging your smartphone in to the somewhere in the hallway or the porch when you get into your house, and leaving it there is a good thing. Going there when you need to send a message or check a message, rather than making it effectively corded while it's in your house. A lot of people find benefit in the putting their phones onto grayscale. It's kind of weird and embarrassing how much less addictive a phone becomes when it's not brightly colored. I've broadly taken sort of social media off my smartphone. I'm pausing because, for a couple of reasons, I've got some on it right presently, so I'm actually feeling hypocritical by recommending that. And I think, like, single-use technologies are a great thing. I think there's lots of issues around Amazon and ebooks we could talk about, but the Kindle is a really interesting device, I think, and I don't feel anything of the negativity that I have associated with my phone associated with reading books on an e-reader. And I've got to believe that that's partly because it's not literally impossible on the Kindle to go and follow up a thought you had on the web browser, but it's a really clunky, awful experience, right? So basically all you can do is read the book that you're reading. And I think that's something very promising in that idea of, like, have an item that does a thing. And it doesn't matter that it's like, I don't want to be against the fact that it's new technology. I want to be against the fact that that so much of this technology is designed and commercially operationally to stop me giving my attention to the thing I want to give it to.
Yeah. And I think that there's so much in that, isn't there, about, like, intentional slowness, about just taking your time, single tasking, being present. I excuse me, I was at my daughter's swimming tonight, and I don't mean to pass judgment on other parents, because I have been that parent that has done this. But I looked around, and every single parent, there was probably 50 or so, were just looking down at their phone. And I looked at my daughter, I had my phone, I intentionally put my phone in my bag, And
Yeah.
I looked around and everyone was looking at their phone. Everyone was doing
Yeah.
something which seemed incredibly important at the time. But the thing
Yeah.
that really caught my attention is the kids were looking up to try to see if their parents were watching them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I had this moment, firstly thinking I have been that parent, but also it like what on earth are you doing that is so important that you're missing these moments?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
I
that's
don't
that's
know.
that's totally right. And I have been both of those parents at swimming, like
Yeah,
literally. I'm
absolutely.
talking about that. I have the
Yeah.
identical experience. I've also been the parent who tries to sort of position the phone so it won't be obvious to the child that I'm looking at it. So there's all the
Yeah.
varieties of this.
Yeah.
The only pushback I'd give, and you're right, you're absolutely right, and we should all aspire to be in those moments. The only pushback I give, just for the sake of an interesting conversation, really,
Yeah.
is that like I think there is a subsection of people who might hear that and who I've interacted with, and I may be one of, who then like feel really bad about the
Totally.
fact that they don't have total sovereignty over their
Mm.
attention. And firstly, I want to say when it comes to smartphones, like it's not a fair fight. We're dealing
It
in
is
an
hard.
economy and an attention economy where, you know, if you can develop the presence of mind to sometimes not be on the phone at swimming, like maybe a third of the time,
Yeah,
like you're
that's good.
doing well in the
That's right.
situation in which we find
Yeah.
ourselves as modern day people. Um, and also just that even if you're not, it doesn't like if the choice is between looking at your phone a lot and looking at your phone a lot and feeling terrible about yourself, like go for the first one.
Totally. Yeah.
Because actually that sort of inner fight that says like I must not be doing what I seem to be doing is not a helpful way past it. I'm not actually contradicting anything you're saying. I'm just saying I think
No, no,
it's
no.
important not to take
I
these
totally
lessons and
agree.
then put them back into that mode
Yeah.
of shouting at yourself.
And I think as well, like you're so right, Oliver. And I think the first step is just the awareness, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
just an awareness to go, oh, as opposed to
yeah,
meaninglessly continue to try and fit more and more in, send more and more emails, buy more and more things. And I think the first step is the realization that we are never going to get it all done. It's just not going to
yeah.
happen. And to actually identify some of those kind of areas, I think it's so important. And um, Oliver, I do want to be respectful of your time. I know that it's getting into the afternoon where you are.
Yeah.
But I just wondered, do you have any parting advice, any sort of final words of wisdom for people that are uh, people that are really trying to live a more meaningful and a more intentional life? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what I'd say is, you know, one might expect the answer to that question to be, well, like, do this every day,
Yeah,
keep the gratitude journal, make a practice of this or a habit of this. And there's lots of that is very valid, right? So if you come across something like that resonates with you, definitely do that. I almost want to get more atomic and microscopic than that and just say,
fantastic.
my advice is if there is something that you value doing with your life, whether it's a relationship that you value or an activity or a hobby or a kind of creative practice or whatever it is, like can you just actually attend to it for
Great,
10 or 20 minutes
great.
today or maybe tomorrow if it's late at night, as I know it is where you are as we record this. I'm not saying you have to stay up late, but like is there something you could just actually do, not very specifically, not um as the beginning of a big new habit, right? Not like could you start meditating for 25 minutes every single morning, but could you just do it once?
Yeah,
And I think sometimes those of us who are sort of thoughtful about these things and want to make our lives better and be better people, whatever, get caught up in this thing of like, what's my new system going to be? And it can have its role, but it can also be counterproductive. And big thing I would say. So we've been talking about paying attention to one's children. I would say, don't worry for now about becoming the kind of person who pays more attention to your child if this is an issue in a person's life, right? Just make an opportunity in the next half day to do it for 20 minutes. And if it's quite exhausting and difficult in a way, which it can be, like once you've done it for 20 minutes, by all means, stare at your phone for 10 minutes if that's what it takes, you know. Or if you know that you always feel better once you've taken some exercise, like do it once. Don't worry for now about deciding to train for a 10K or something if that's not where you're at in that process. So it is just that, like, ultimately it comes down to spending your time in a certain way more than techniques, schedules, plans, and visions. It's just doing a little bit of it. And then sure, do a little more of it and a little more of it until you're doing it all the time. But don't worry about that for now.
Yeah. Oliver, it has been an absolute joy. And I truly mean this to speak to you. And your work and your book has impacted me in more ways than I can ever put to words. And so I am hugely grateful that you would take the time to pour your soul out and your heart out into this work. And I know that I speak on behalf of so many people that it's such a meaningful work, and a work that has had so much impact in the lives of countless people. So thank you for taking the time to talk to me. It's been a real honor to get to have a conversation with you today.
Thank you. It continues to blow my mind that this stuff resonates with people in the way that it does, but it's the best thing about it. It's brilliant. I love it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.